Who's the Korban? A Dvar Torah for Parashat Tzav. Last week's statistical video was followed by a host of reactions, some more positive and some less so. The more positive ones enjoyed getting a slightly clearer picture regarding the attitude of the scriptures to the various korbanot, at least on the linguistic side, and the negative ones were looking for something more practical. That's why I decided to follow up on one of the words mentioned last week and examine it more deeply, and maybe, just maybe, reach some practical insight. Let's start with a short myth. It's commonly thought that all korbanot fit into one of four categories: Asham, Olah, Hatat, and Shlamim. Each of these categories has subsections. There are types of Olah: cow, sheep, bird, flower, individual, public, obligatory, etc. Types of Xataot: cow, lamb, goat, internal, external, Yolדת, Nizir, נחשון. Shlamim: Pesach, Toda, Ráya, firstborn, מעcer, and Ashmot: Nizir, מצורע, מעילה, מוצא, שפתיים, and others. This is a myth that I have often encouraged, but the verses don't seem to do so. Olah, Hatat, and Shlamim are indeed all called Korbanot, at one point or another at least, but the Torah does not call the Asham a Korban even once. Allow me to explain. In Parashat Vayikra we saw that the Asham verses, the word Korban is mentioned, and if so, the statement I made in the previous paragraph isn't correct. It is worth, though, noting that although this is true, it is mentioned concerning the Korban Olah v'yored, that is, an Asham in which the rich person brings a sheep as a Hatat offering. There the word Korban doesn't exist. The poor man brings two birds, one as an Olah and the other as a Hatat, and the exceptionally poor brings a flour offering as a Hatat. In other words, there's no way that anyone will think that this is Asham because there are no birds or flour Ashamot. So even though this is an Asham, it's not really. And what about our parasha, Parashat Tzav? Here the Torah describes Torah to Asham, and apparently I'm in trouble again. In the Asham verses in our paragraph, it's written, and he shall offer lehakriv, all of its fat, and the fat tail, and the fat that covers the innards, kerev. And if in the previous parasha we could have attributed the root to the Olah and Hatat, this time it'll be slightly more complicated to do so. Let me offer four interpretations, and those who understand know that when four interpretations are needed, it's a flimsy interpretation. The title Korban does not appear this time, only the action lehakriv. Already in the previous parsha, I debated about whether or not the word kerev should be considered or not in the association of the word Korban, because kerev means innards. Rashi points out that our verse speaks of the action of moving the organs to the altar, holacha, an action which isn't mentioned in its proper place in last week's parsha, and that it was technically necessary to explain what exactly is going to happen. This action is learned in all the other korbanot from the word yakriv, therefore there is a need to use this term. And Rashi explains that the need for the word Asham hu is to emphasize that sometimes Ashamot become Olot, and this is not really Asham, or maybe it's talking about the Olah aspect of the Asham. In any case, it's fascinating to see that Onkelos translate the word Ishe la Hashem as Korban before Hashem, a point which only emphasizes how hard the psukim work to avoid using the word Korban in connection with the Asham. And what about the practical side I promised? I'm not 100% sure. It's clear from the verses that the Asham doesn't function as a classic Korban. Even in its practical aspects, it's sometimes compared to an Olah, sometimes to a Hatat, and sometimes, like in Korban Olah v'yored, it functions as both. Sometimes it's brought for intentional sins, and others sins we don't even know about. It's a real outsider. Another Korban who would have behaved this way would have been excommunicated. Ask the Hatat. An attempt by Rabbi Eliezer in the Mishnah in Masechet Pesachim to learn from the sins of the Asham, from the Hatat to the Asham, is rejected in the Gemara almost in disgust. Ramban also considers the Asham to be the least of the gift that are brought on the archel because it's for serious sins. But in the verses summarizing the sacrifices of Parashat Tzav, the Asham is not absent. This is the Torah for the Olah and the Hatat and the Asham. I think this happens to be my father-in-law's favorite verse in the Torah for some reason. Long story, forget about it. And this verse says, On the day he commanded the children of Israel lehakriv et korbanam to Hashem in Sinai desert. So maybe the Asham is called a Korban after all. And perhaps, if the Asham is called a Korban and is listed among the Korbanot, despite the differences between them, in a time when people are having difficulty finding things to bring them closer, we might be able to do the same. If you enjoy this video, please pass it on to someone else and subscribe. You might even want to buy my book. There's a link below. I am Jovi Holtz, one who loves Tanakh.